I think I don't know if it's the language specifically, but it's these like he has these little like um explanations or editor's notes in for each of the aphorisms in each of the books, and it's like because like it's hard when you're first reading it to like latch on to it.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? It's like you're reading this, you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, you only know what I'm talking about if you read it.
Yeah.
And so when if he gives you a little structure, it's nice.
I have a couple places where I have like two different competing interpretations, and I want to like see what you think about them. And so I'm curious
Okay.
what the what Kaufman says about the if he has notes about those sections too, where it's like I read them and I like both of the interpretations make sense, but they can't both be true, or they are both
Okay.
like implicit in it, and that's like part of the fun of it.
All right. We're going to the text.
No, not yet.
Oh,
We
okay.
can, but like we don't need to start with those things. We can start with something
Okay.
else. I was thinking my mental outline was just kind of go chronologically through the prologue and then talk
Sure.
about things as they come up, and then that will naturally progress into more of like a theme based discussion.
Sure. Would you make of the prologue?
Okay, honest, the prologue is one of my favorite pieces of writing ever. I've read this prologue many times now, and I just love it. It's funny. It's um I just I love that it's a like a philosophy book that's in a narrative, that it's a story. That it's not
Yeah.
just like there are definitely times where Zarathustra like will say like this is my idea, but for the most part it's just this like narrative story, which I think it's just a great way to read it. It's like that's why I liked Persig so much, is because
Mhm.
it's a philosophy in a story where you're not tied to like each sentence being an addition to the ideas. Like some sentences are just imagery, or some are just funny, or some are just like describing the yeah like the scenery of what's happening. So
So it follows like
overall joy. Yeah, sure.
mythic poetry as opposed to philosophical
Like
or systematic
arithmetic.
philosophy or treatise.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I like that. So my notes are just kind of just like chronologically. So first, there's like the image of Zarathustra being alone in the cave with the snake and what is it? The serpent and the eagle.
Yeah.
And apparently he's just been there for a while, just like greeting the sun every morning and meditating, which is again that's funny. Like and then
Yeah.
the he like thanks the
It's
sun for bestowing its glow on him, and then he's
yeah.
like, now I have to be like the sun and I must go down because the sun has to go down. And so it's
Yeah. It's so funny because in Kaufman's translation, at least, it starts like the first line: when Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went to the mountains.
mm-hmm.
And we talked about this because there's the 30 years old, and then the serpent and the eagle,
Mm-hmm.
the bird and the serpent, and I was just getting like so much Jesus in the first
Well,
like in prologue,
well, yeah,
because he's
that's the fun
clearly
part.
trying to
Yeah, it is.
because Jesus was 30 when he started his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Serpent was there at the garden
Mm-hmm.
during the fall. The eagle was there when Jesus was like baptized in
Mm-hmm.
the Jordan,
Right.
and it's like you bring it all together. It's like yeah, he's trying to make it like that.
Right. It's
Bless
funny
the
like
cup
that.
that wants to overflow.
Yeah. So one of the first things is that one of the first like questions I had is in this first part where um, Zarathustra says his goal is to make the wise find joy in their folly. Where is that part? Here it's like there it is. I should like to give it away, it being his wisdom. I should like to give away my wisdom and distribute it until the wise among men have again become happy in their folly and the poor happy in their wealth. So this is one of the things where it's like there's two ways I can understand this. The first way is that so the wise realizing they have folly or stupidity and taking joy in that because it's like this opportunity to overcome themselves in the way that there's this later section about how the greatest hour is when your happiness arouses your disgust, like that idea of like Zarathustra's goal is to point out to people where they're going wrong so that they can realize the joy in like overcoming those stupidities. So that's one way to understand it. Or the other way is to just like the idea of like just inverting values of the poor being happy in their wealth in this like not a Christian sense of because it's like it's not going that direction, but just flipping everything on its head that it's like so like breaking the tables of values in such a way that everything is just upset. So it's either like
Mm.
showing them the opportunity for overcoming, or it's just creating absolute chaos like a Joker. So yeah,
Sure. Sorry, I'm
and
trying
like
to
but
I'm
both
trying to
both make
find the
sense.
context.
So
Yeah,
I don't know.
because he follows. Wait. Because he talks about like right before there, he's like, um, "I'm weary of my wisdom, like a bee that has gathered too much honey.
Mm-hmm.
I need hands outstretched to receive it. I would give away and distribute until the wise among men." Yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
I I gave a little bit, maybe more the first than the
Mm-hmm.
second, because I had just read like a lot of William James
Mm-hmm.
pragmatism, and some people describe William James as kind of like a mature version of Nietzsche, because he's like, so one quotes that William James has is, truth is not something static, it's like a property, or it's not a property static inherent in something, it's like a harmonious relation. So like truth isn't like contained in a concept, it's contained in the concept and relation, the concept as a relation as it relates and harmonizes with reality.
Mm-hmm.
So like something isn't true because its essence is true, something is true because it's true, like
Because
pragmatically.
okay, like
It's hard to explain.
like practically kind of like the way it relates to something.
Yeah,
It's like it's like correct in the moment.
I actually have the book right here. The truth of an idea is not a stagnant property within it. It's something that's flowing.
Yeah.
So for example, like models of reality are true insofar as they like reflect reality truly.
Yeah.
So like if you're making error, if it's like, you know what I mean, like
I think
coherence
so.
might be
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah.
And so I was giving this like a more of the first reading because I was seeing him say like, all right, you're so ideologically laden in this static sort of cultural form that you have no room to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like you're so entrenched in this and that you have too much, you've gathered too much honey.
Uh-huh.
And so the wise are just feeding on the same old stuff that the culture has been feeding them for so many years that they have no more joy
Yeah.
in their folly.
Because
So that's why
yeah.
I thought like Zarathustra just being the force of the great doubt, to use his own term.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a long-winded answer,
No,
but
that
yeah.
makes sense. And that's so then at the other end of the prologue when Zarathustra leaves the town and he's kind of like reflecting on where he went wrong because the town people didn't follow him.
Yeah.
And then he says he wants companions who follow me because they want to follow themselves. The creator seeks creators, those who inscribe new values on new. Oh wait, no, that's not it. It's Oh, here it is. It's after leaving the town, Zarathustra says, "Behold the good and the just," who he like tried to talk to, like the townspeople who like think of themselves as good and
Yeah.
doing the right things. Whom do they hate most? Him who smashes their tables of values, the breaker, the
Yeah.
lawbreaker, but he is the creator. And so that he's
Mhm.
now Zarathustra's going to try to seek out the creators, not those, because like like the townspeople are lost, like they're just like a lost
Mhm.
cause. He tried to preach to them, but they're too set into their systems that they will never, like, they are the last men. They'll never reach for the Overman. So now he has to look for people who are who like what was like the chief in Lila, like it's basically that person, like Zuni.
Oh yeah, I know. I
It's
know you're
that thing.
talking
It's
about.
like
Yeah,
that same
yeah,
idea. It's like that's who he's
yeah,
trying to find now, is those who are purposefully breaking the tables of values because they actually have a chance of
yeah.
doing something drastic enough to get away from themselves. So
Yeah, it was like the drunken outcast
yeah,
who
yep,
became the next chief
yeah,
because he had room for chaos.
yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
yeah,
It's that same idea.
those with chaos can give, or no, it's only those with chaos who can give birth to it.
A,
What does he say?
a dancing
He's
star.
still,
So you
yeah, a
can give
dancing,
birth to a dancing
dancing.
star.
Yeah,
So yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like
I
that's what
also
he's trying to do when he leaves.
I also love the imagery of, because I was like, I mean, we talked about the tightrope walker a little bit, and like, so, what does the tightrope symbolize for
A
you?
tightrope walker.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So one thing is that um, the tightrope walker like symbolizes what Zarathustra wants people to do, is to live a life of danger that
Mm-hmm.
is like a great spectacle and impressive, but it's impressive because of its ambition and danger. And in the tightrope walker's action is basically the response to what happens when God is dead. Because basically, the tightrope walker falls and he's dying, and he tells Zarathustra, I'm going to hell, aren't I? And Zarathustra says, no, there's no God. So the tightrope walker says, well, if there's no God, then my life was pointless. Like, what was all this for? And then Zarathustra says, no, you lived a life of danger, and so your life had meaning, basically. And then the tightrope walker dies. So it's like the tightrope walker is by living in a way that's dangerous and striving, that's what people should do because God
Mm.
is dead. So yeah.
I saw as like, yeah, I saw what I felt or what I saw was like a continuation of that. Um, because like obviously, yeah, the tightrope is the, because you always talk about like the great like going across
Mm-hmm.
or like going
Yep.
over, and like the tightrope's obviously that thing that goes over to the overman. But it also, it's like you think about the tightrope, it's like, and then you think about like the infinity of existence and what Nietzsche's trying to confront. It's like impersonal, like the universe doesn't care about you. You could just die.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, the tightrope's just confronting mortality and death and the mystery of existence, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Because you add that onto it, and it's like, yeah, dangerous. Because every moment you're constantly aware of, yeah, I could just be wiped out by anything I'm doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like the thing that allows you to walk over, because they like the tightrope walker is walking on the tightrope, which is dangerous, and everybody else is just watching in the town square, and they're all set in their ways. The
Mm-hmm.
last men, no danger, nothing to excite them out of their current state, and the tightrope walker is above. And you know how Nietzsche talks about in the later aphorisms, I think it's on reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about like I am like elevated,
Mm-hmm.
and I like thought back. I was like, oh, maybe that's the tightrope walker, like
Being
elevated above all the people in the town square, walking in a dangerous but like elevated path.
Mm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the other thing with like living a life of striving and danger is um, this goes back to when Zarathustra is coming down the mountain. He meets the hermit, and the hermit is like asking him what he's gonna do in the town, and the hermit, like, he's a Christian hermit, so he like tells him, like, take part of their load and carry it with them, like bear their cross. Like, that's what the hermit does. He like tries to take on the suffering of others like Christ does. But instead, Zarathustra wants to do the opposite. Like, he wants to add to their load. He wants them to bear more and carry more and take more um, like agency over themselves. And
Mm.
that's again like living a life of personal confrontation with danger and mortality, rather than just kind of like letting the hermit or
Yeah,
Jesus bear that for you. So
it's like an honest approach almost, like a more, like if you're talking about bearing your cross, it's almost a more honest approach to bearing your cross than saying like than being a Christian and say like bear your cross.
mm-hmm.
because it's like you don't have anything else to bear your cross with you.
Yeah, because
Like
you're alone. Yeah.
you're just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's a more real. I don't know how to how to use that in language,
Mm-hmm.
like, or how to describe that in language. But one thing too, actually two things about the hermit. I thought it was so funny that the hermit says, "Man is for me too imperfect a thing,"
Mm-hmm.
because like God to Nietzsche is obviously is a concept, like a perfection,
Mm-hmm.
concept as perfection, and which is now unbelievable. And so I thought that was funny that he slipped in. Man for me is too imperfect a thing because he's the what he's claiming Christianity has done is made God a concept and perfected it and perfected it. And it's so far away now that it doesn't even really exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing was why Zarathustra talks to the hermit and says, "What could I have to give for you? But let me go quickly, lest I take something from you." Why do you think Zarathustra did not tell the hermit that God is dead?
When Zarathustra heard these words, he saluted the saint and said, "What should I have to give you? Let me go quickly, that I may take nothing from you." I think one thing could be like the hermit seems to be perfectly happy. Like why would Nietzsche
Yeah.
or why would Zarathustra like bother him? Like the
Mm-hmm.
why would I take away the knowledge of God from you? Like you clearly you're happy. Like there'd be no benefit to Zarathustra doing that in the same way that he like realizes that about the people all the people of the town, not just the hermit, but all the people are so set in what they do that there's no saving them, and there's
Sure.
definitely no saving the hermit. Like if Zarathustra were to tell the hermit God is dead, I don't think the hermit would believe him. It wouldn't really do it. It wouldn't have a point. So
Yeah.
like the taking would be like taking the belief in God from the hermit.
Yeah.
I think.
Because his goal isn't to. I mean, his goal is to shake things up,
Mm-hmm.
lightning bolts and flooding and
Yeah,
all that imagery. But it's not like a evil
and it's
shaking
and it's
things up
also
in the
not all
set.
people.
Yeah.
It's also
Hmm?
not all. It's also not all people. He's not trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
convert all people to the faith in the Overman. It's like it's more he's trying to plant the seed that some people may strive for the Overman, and that those like unique great few those are the ones who will bring about that change. It's not going to be everyone. Most people are going to be left out of this.
Yeah. So do you think that's why Zarathustra carries the tightrope walker? Like, is that
Mm-hmm.
symbolic of the people who? Because he falls off the rope.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that was symbolic of like the Zarathustra as acting as the Overman, carrying the people who don't make it on his shoulders to reach the Overman. You know, it's like the continual striving towards the Overman.
It could
I
be.
don't know, maybe.
I don't. I feel like I don't know where this idea comes from, but it's that like not everyone's gonna get there, and it's not Zarathustra or the people who do strive for that. It's not their job to carry others there. Like that's another Christian idea of
Yeah.
like all people
Sure.
reaching salvation. Like it's a very elitist philosophy that it's only the
Yeah.
great and the strongest who will make it this far. Like that's the section
Yeah.
on like war and warriors, like not like literal war, but those who are willing to go to war against themselves, and not
Yeah.
everyone is willing to do that, and so it's not for everyone. I think it's more. I think
Well, because
carrying
he
the
ends up
yeah.
leaving the corpse, right?
Eventually, yeah, he like buries him
Yeah.
in a tree.
Yeah.
So I think it's part. I think the carrying of the corpse is, it's partly like a showing of his failure. Like Zarathustra went to town to try to recruit followers, and
Sure.
he left with a dead person. He left with like a corpse. Not even a single living person went with him. So it's just like a showing of how much he failed. And then it's also an honoring of the tightrope walker because he was one who did strive and
Mm.
act dangerously. So it's like an emulation of someone who did try and uh and just comedy
Sure.
to
So
highlight his
would you
failure.
say it's more like Nietzsche's realization that like because like going back to like on reading and writing, like he had such a problem with like philosophers because they were writing to be read.
Mm-hmm.
And then is this Nietzsche's realization that like the Overman should not be someone who speaks to be heard? he speaks for himself out of his own. He writes with his blood.
Yeah,
Maybe that's a better, yeah.
yeah, that would make sense because the other thing is that the idea of like externally created values, that like this, like the whole crusade of the Zarathustra is for people to turn away from anything outside of themselves and like and turn completely inwards to their own values. So like this is one section that I really want to talk about, is like when he says um uh like when your happiness should arouse your disgust. Like the
Mm,
hour when you say, "What good is my happiness? It is poverty and dirt and wretched contentment, but my happiness should justify existence itself." And so that, I think that idea explains the part that you're just saying about writing to for others to be read, for people outside of yourself to read what you wrote, as opposed to just writing what you believe. And so, like, what
mm,
good is my happiness? It's wretched contentment, but my happiness should justify existence. So the way I understand that is, the first happiness in that statement is the happiness that you learn from others. Like when you're in school and you're learning vocabulary and your teacher says, this word is happy. Happy means when you feel good and joy and positivity. And you learn that, and you strive for that value that someone else created, that your teacher taught you about, as opposed to true happiness, which can't be described outside of yourself. It's purely an experience of that emotion that's beyond any,
sure.
or like inaccessible but by others. And so your happiness, the idea of what we like collectively think of as happiness, is good. Like this isn't like a condemnation of like anything ever. I think it's not nihilism. It's just like a self-created value. It's like an
Mm,
idolization of that. So your happiness should be something that you independently create, to an understanding of like the way you are happy is different than the way I'm happy. And if I try to strive for your happiness, I'll never be happy. But if I strive for what makes me happy, that would justify existence. And so that's the same thing as like writing for others versus just writing what you know to be true for yourself.
mm. Yeah,
So
it's a fine line, isn't it? Because like after that, um, after he says that, he's like, "What matters my virtue? What matters my justice? What matters my pity?" Um,
mm-hmm,
and it's not like, like you said, you. It's hard because sometimes in his writing you do get that because he's so what's the word, passionate.
mm-hmm,
Like it's so like electrifying. Like his writing is so intense, and that's why it gets taken out of context so many times. Like,
mm-hmm,
but he's not saying like destroy. Oh, what am I trying to say? It's more like I think it's more the appeasement that he's worried about, as opposed to like if fulfilling virtue is truly the thing, like virtue as like in a Christian sense, like maybe that's what you have to do. But like the hermit, for example. But it's like striving from like the herd collective consciousness, and like creating like an independent self-justified existence, and maybe that ends up right back where you were,
yeah, for
but
sure, yeah,
striving towards that and being honest, and like you have to you have to like first destroy the things you've like held as
mm-hmm,
true in your life. You have to grow up,
mm-hmm,
and then before you can honestly come back to them, if that's where you end up.
right,
I think it's more just like we were talking about, like the great doubt, like waking people up and shaking them until they like can
mm-hmm.
see again.
And make them realize how complacent they are. Like the one you just
Yeah.
read, like, what good are my virtue? So what good are my virtues? As yet they have not made me rage with passion. So like if you have virtues, or you have ideals, but they don't make you like vigorously aware of life and acting and motivated and engaged, then like what good are they? They're not doing anything for you. They're making you
Mm.
complacent and distraught from life. And so, like you said, it's not that having virtues is bad. It's that like um, unconsciously accepting whatever random virtues you were taught, and then never questioning them and never evaluating them. That's what he's against. And so,
Yeah. He
like
says
you do have to go
earlier,
through a process of destroying it,
where is it?
sure, but you can end up with the same ones, just living, but like living for them with a different reason.
Yeah. He says, verily, this is right before that quote. Verily, a polluted stream is man. One must be a sea to be able to receive a polluted stream without becoming unclean.
Mm-hmm.
Behold, I teach you the overman. He is this sea. In him your great contempt can go under. What do you make of the go under?
It's that.
Because I
Well, it's the same. So it's the image of going under is like one. It's cyclical in that. So that's like a whole different like eternal recurrence. That's another like
Mhm.
Nietzsche idea of things always happening, and that's why things have meaning after God is dead, is because things that happen always happen, and so like actions are echoed in eternity or whatever. So that's one thing, is that cyclical nature of like the sun. Like the sun is always going under and going over, and then Zarathustra goes down, and he goes down from the mountain and under into the town, and then so then in order for you to, and then the same thing we just said, in order for you to like live out this idea and challenge your virtue and like destroy what everything you care about, that's going under into like chaos, like unknown, destroying things. That's going under again. So and then cyclically coming back out of that and having something new, and then going back under and evaluating again, and just this, and like living in that constant cycle and flux of always, yeah, like always evaluating what you believe. So that's one thing.
but it's also like the affirmation of that. That's part of the eternal currents idea, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
not only that as being true, but also saying like yes to it,
Mm-hmm.
like resoundingly. It's also part of
Right.
the high noon was like because is like when he also talks about like the great noontide, like is that part of that same idea, like with the sun like being the highest? Is that like when you can see things most clearly, and then so
Mm-hmm.
you like when you see things most clearly, that's when you can destroy them, and then like the
Sure.
sun sets and goes back under, and it's like
Yeah, and then
yeah,
it's also the point in which the sun starts to go down. Like once the sun reaches its
yeah,
peak, it
yeah.
starts to go down, and that's like the image that Zarathustra's talking about with, man must still have chaos in his soul to give birth to the star, and man will not always have this chaos. Like humanity is trending towards the last man, and the last man can't give birth to the overman, and so like it's like a dwindling opportunity for humans to like do this, and because it's not always going to be an option, because eventually they'll just
Mhm.
turn back into the worms or the apes
Yeah,
of the last man.
yeah.
That's
So
also
yeah, and I actually just turned to a quote. It's he says, "Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer shoot the arrow of his
right.
longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have forgotten how to whir." I just wrote nihilism right next to that
Well, that's,
because
yeah,
he's
that's it. Yeah.
like, yeah, people try to like characterize him as a nihilist, but it's like it's the complete opposite. Like he's like, guys, you're about to become nihilists.
Like
Like,
stop.
wake up,
Yeah.
stop being nihilists. But it's funny because the people he's trying to wake up are the people who are shouting nihilist
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at like at him, which is funny because you read him and you really like are challenged by his ideas, and it's like, oh, like I was so wrong. He's actually like he's doing the work. Like he's the one trying to lift us up out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And that it gets back to like the eternal recurrence too, because um, his whole fear with the last man was a lack of self evaluation
Mm-hmm.
because you're so entrenched in whatever ideal system you're in.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the like as we've sort of like journeyed through like text this fall, it's been like you see these sort of eternal recurrence in ideas, and that like gods die, chaos ensues, gods come back.
Mm-hmm.
And like when we read Macbeth, the king dies, chaos ensues, the king comes back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this circle of values that come about, chaos ensues, they're restored. Chaos
Mm-hmm.
ensues, they're restored. And it's like he's sort of taking like the meta pattern of value creation and all of these things and like looking at it and being like, all right, bang, it's like a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like Twilight of the Idols,
Mm-hmm.
which is fascinating too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Um, the next thing I was unsure of that I'm curious to hear about is the end of chapter, like what, verse 4, where he's like, I love those, I love those, I love him, like all those,
Mm-hmm.
because some of them some of them read like sarcastic, like loving the like what does he say? Like he loves the despisers and the humble and the merciful, and that's not true. Like Zarathustra doesn't, I don't know, idolize them or praise them truly, but he still says I love them. But then he'll also say things like I love him who wills his own downfall. And so that one I could
Mm.
understand as like willing your own downfall, being someone who purposefully goes under and faces that abyss to come out of it, or it's like someone who wills their own downfall in the sense of like the despisers of the body who hate their bodies and hate the world and should just die already. Like they're willing their own destruction by living out their virtues. Because also this is like clearly like a comment or like a parody of like blessed are
Yeah.
those, like blessed are all
Yeah.
like the from the Sermon on the Mount.
The
So
Sermon on the Mount.
and so it's like either he's like continuing that because like the ones who Jesus says are blessed are like those who can be saved or like those who can reach salvation. So he's either like following that and like actually praising those who he admires or cares about, or it's like a complete reversal and this is just like purely a sarcastic series of roasting those he doesn't like. I don't know which one.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, some of them, I did get that with some of them, but some of them too, like, I think you said this too, like he like intermingles what he actually wants the overman
Right.
to be.
Yeah.
Like, I love him who chastens his God because he loves his God, for he must perish of the wrath of his God. It's funny because like he never capitalizes God, and if you like take God seriously in that, you will not understand what he's talking about. But if you take God as like the accumulation of the cultural values, it's like I love, like the person who loves God is the person who destroys God.
Yeah. So
And he's like the
Kaufman
person. Yeah.
doesn't capitalize God.
No.
Oh. Hollingsdale does.
Really?
Yeah, see?
Really?
So
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, because in this other translation I had, it's probably capitalized. It's the same one that you have, yeah. And but you like can't understand that unless you get what he's trying to say. Because if you say like, oh, he's just killing God and there's nothing, it's like then you're nihilist. Because you have this perfect idea of God and God is the reason for existence and all this stuff. But Nietzsche's saying, no, God was created. I love what God is trying to do for humanity, so let's destroy it and rebuild it.
Yeah.
And like some of those, like you have to read, like you literally sit there and look at the line, you're like, what? And then it comes to you after like 3 or 4 readings. But
yeah,
like he talked about when I love him who makes his virtue his addiction and his catastrophe. For his virtue's sake, he wants to live on and to live no longer. Like that's so confusing.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he loves a person who's trying to make the virtue his addiction and his. So maybe because like there you could see that being virtue as like the person who loves society's virtues and abides by them. And loses his life because he's just the last man. Or it's the person who actually loves what virtue should be and so goes under. And then for virtue's sake, he wants to live on and to live no longer. Yeah, I don't know.
Some of them, yeah, you just give up. Like move
Yeah.
on. What else? All right, where are we in the story? So we're kind of talking about the speech. Do you have anything to say about the last man other than what we've said so far?
Not really. No. Nothing that comes to mind right now.
Well, so like kind of what I was saying earlier, like that whole thing about happiness, about like creating your own happiness and not ascribing someone else's happiness is so what
Mm.
so the last man says we have discovered happiness, and so that's like a finality, like that's like we have found happiness and this is happiness and there's no changing it. So like
Mm.
the last man is just purely static in his thinking, like there's no change, and there's also no striving. Like later on says they still work, for work is entertainment, but they take care the entertainment does not exhaust them. So they don't really try. They don't push themselves to exhaustion. Nobody grows rich or poor anymore. Both are too much of a burden. Who still wants to rule? Who obey? Both are too much of a burden. And so that idea of like the the worst possible thing for humanity is to avoid exhaustion and taking on burdens. And so then
Yeah.
what Zarathustra wants people to do is to go to exhaustion, and then later this later thing about um, on the chair of sleep, that
Yeah.
refers, yeah, on the chairs, like that one is about, what is the title of that word? Oh, here it is. Oh yeah, of the chairs of virtue, and like this wise man says that like the greatest thing is to just sleep well, and if you're living a good life, you will sleep well, and that will be like your judge of your virtue. And then Zarathustra hears that and laughs and says, basically like, what does he say? Um, I can't find a good quote for it, but basically it's that this isn't honorable. This isn't ideal. Like if you're sleeping well, that means you're not challenging yourself
Yeah.
and like and question. Oh, that was it. It was like the questioning, because the wise man says, if you have to consider questions like, shall I bear false witness? Shall I commit adultery? Shall I covet my neighbor's maidservant? None of this would be consistent with good sleep. And so he's
Mm.
saying if you just live by socially constructed values and just live by them, you won't have to think. You'll just act in accordance
Yeah.
with them, and then you'll sleep well and you'll be assured that you're virtuous. But then
Yeah.
Zarathustra says that's, you can kind of imagine what he would say about that. And
Yeah.
so the wise man here is kind of acting as in the same way the last men do. So
Yeah. I actually do have one more thing to say about the last man. When after he's done speaking to the crowd, and the crowd's like, "Give us this last man, Zarathustra. We want the last
yeah.
man." And then he ends the speech with, "There is ice in their laughter."
Ooh.
And I was like, I wrote Dante's Hell right next to it,
Ooh.
because in Hell, in Dante's Inferno, Hell is a frozen lake cooled by Satan's flapping wings trying to escape the ice, and his flapping wings just make the ice colder and colder, and he's stuck.
That's pretty good.
And like that, when I read that, I was like, bam, like he's totally playing off Dante there, because like you get like the stuck metaphors too, like pollution,
Mm-hmm.
too much honey, like all these things that he's talking about. Honey, another biblical motif too,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like he's just constantly saying like, you're stuck, you're stuck, you're stuck, and it's like, yeah, uh, you need chaos, you need to willingly take on and affirm the burdens that destroying virtue ensues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed. It's a good reference.
There's so many references.
All right. Hmm. All right. So there's the three metamorphoses, the chair of virtue. Let's see. In some ways, I feel like it's hard to talk about the rest of the book, because it's like everything is just different iterations of what the prologue is.
Sure.
We've talked about, we keep like referencing the further ones, because it's like it's just repeated ideas with different images, which is great, but it makes it hard to talk about each one in new ways rather than just repeating the same ideas. Like the three metamorphoses is like we've already kind of I feel we've like really fleshed that out where it's you're a child, then you're a camel, and then you're a lion, and then you're a child again.
Mm.
We kind of like got through that.
Should we talk about on the afterworldly?
On the
'Cause-
of the afterworldsman, the one after Chairs of Virtue. Or which one
yes.
is okay?
Does yours say chairs of virtue?
Of the Chairs of Virtue.
Mine says on the teachers of virtue.
Ah.
Right. And then he ends on the teachers of virtue. He says, "Today too, there may still be a few like this preacher of virtue, and not also honest. But their time is up, and not for long they will stand like this. Soon they will lie."
Mine
Which
ends
is
with
just yeah.
mine ends with blessed are these drowsy men, for they shall soon drop off.
Yeah, it says, "Blessed are these sleepy ones, for they soon shall drop off." It's the consistent imagery of sleep and stuckness.
Mm-hmm.
But on the afterworldly, it was suffering and the incapacity that created all afterworlds. This and that brief madness of bliss, which is experienced only by those who suffer most deeply. That's his, like, I think it's his elitist philosophy trying to creep back in, because he's talking about how, like, it's a certain few who are able to confront, maybe not elitist, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's like him talking about how like these ideas were valid, like they were experiences that were had by people, awakenings that they were had by people, and now that we've just blindly accept and follow. And it seems like it makes more sense to me than like religion being something that's just like once and for all true forever. It's like the continual like circle of birth and death of values and creations. And it's also not to say that like there's just absolute moral relativity. I think it's a lot more complex than to just say everything is relative for Nietzsche, because he's obviously affirming that there can be something. Otherwise, like if everything was truly just like nothing, then why would the Overman even need to exist?
Well, some things are like literally true, for sure. Like
Sure.
something like the things he would say are literally true would be like evolution, like species evolving is like a critical part of understanding the Overman, or kind of almost like psychology. Like psychology is the way he understands psychology is true. Like slave and master morality, like that's not something to like history is true. So it's not that everything is completely arbitrary. It's like things like values especially operate within those constraints of like values don't just spawn out of nowhere. Like values spawn out of historical and psychological realities. Like they're not like the things aren't random. They're created, but they're not randomly created.
The creator wanted to look away from himself, so he created the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Turns out it's harder to discuss Nietzsche than you think.
It's quite difficult. Because like okay, so especially like of reading and writing, like like I read like if I read that out loud, it's of all writings I love, only that which is written with blood. Write with blood, and you will discover that blood is spirit. It is not an easy thing to understand unfamiliar blood. I hate the reading idler. Like, there's nothing else I can say to like add on to that. It's just like it's like a statement. It's like the only like the best analysis I could do would just be like rephrasing it, but not I can't like add anything to that I can think of.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
So
Here's a question.
yeah, let's open it up.
Is Jordan Peterson's take on Nietzsche good or bad?
You'd have to explain his take on Nietzsche.
That Nietzsche was sad that God was dead.
No, of course that's complete. That feels completely wrong. Because like it's not because the only Nietzsche didn't only write God is dead. He also wrote like extensively about how like stupid Christian morality is, because it's born out of resentment, and so.
But the thing though is that, and this is one thing I did know, that Nietzsche doesn't hate. Well, he has critiques for like Jesus of Nazareth. Like he has certain things that he would change if he was Jesus of Nazareth. Maybe we'd say that. But he like he says there was one Christian and he died on the cross. Mm-hmm. Like in some respects, Jesus was an overman.
Yeah.
Or like on the spectrum of the overman. Mm-hmm. But he hates, and I think it's a good thing to clarify this. Like he hates the institution. Yeah. The societal like interpolation, like what Christianity is and how it's ruled over society. Yeah. And that's a lot. Yeah. It's a interesting distinction because it's like it warrants. It doesn't warrant like a destruction. Like we should never read the Bible ever again because it's stupid. Mm-hmm. Like he's not saying that. He's saying like, all right, the Bible was not the inspired word of God. The Bible is an ecology of ideas and values that has grown over time and that we should learn from, but that we ultimately need to move on from. Right. Not in the sense that it's wrong, but in the sense that we need to move on from it being like authoritatively true. Mm-hmm. And like dictating how we it's so hard. I'm trying to be careful with my language and it's difficult. Like now that we should outrightly reject that the Bible is true insofar as it can aid us in living a meaningful life, but we should reject the Bible as dogmatically and ideologically true.
Yeah. Like the unchallenged acceptance of it.
Yeah. And I also, one thing I disagree with Jordan Peterson on is it seems like he wants to go back to like a society that is dominated by Christianity. And I don't know if he's being like dishonest or like what's going on, because it seems like he wants to like reinstate these things.
I think it's more of what Christianity represents as a single uniting trait amongst all people. Like that's what he like that's what he criticizes about like the postmodernists, is that like they have no unification. Like there's nothing that, like if you take that, the way he describes that philosophy to its conclusion, then there's nothing that can unite people and everyone is completely alone. And so the opposite of that would be something like having a unified religious
mythos
affiliation.
Mythos.
Yeah. Because we're too large of a society to have creation stories around the campfire. And so we need